The clock's ticking, Ursula. Every minute you hesitate, another cell in her heart fails.
The pen slipped from her trembling fingers. The contract lay open on the billionaire's desk, her name already halfway written, her mother's heartbeat fading in the hospital across town. If she didn't sign, her mother would die. But if she did, she would belong to him. Like, subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Ethan Blackwood's voice cut through the silence, calm and lethal. The clock's ticking, Ursula. Every minute you hesitate, another cell in her heart fails. Tears blurred her vision. You can't use my mother's life like this. I'm not using it, he said, leaning back in the leather chair. I'm buying it. The question is, what are you selling in return? Her breath came out in shallow bursts. The room smelled of money, polished wood, expensive whiskey, dominance. You're a monster. I'm a businessman. His tone didn't rise, but the quiet power in it pinned her in place. Sign, and she lives. Walk out, and she dies. Simple math. Her knuckles whitened around the pen. She could almost hear her mother's weak voice. Don't cry, Ursula. Be strong. A single tear fell on the page, smearing the ink of her name. Then the flash of the memory cut in. The night that destroyed everything, rain hammering on tin roofs. Her mother collapsing after the argument. The doctor's words, "You have 5 days to save her life." Ursula remembered racing through the streets with a $1,000 bundle of desperation, begging her boyfriend, Jared, for help. He'd said he was out of town, then finding him, half-naked, with her best friend. The betrayal burned even now, echoing in her ribs. Her voice cracked as she stared at the contract. You don't even know me. Ethan rose from his chair, tall, perfectly controlled. I don't need to know you. I just need your signature. And your obedience. His words were too sharp, too sure. But behind that stillness, she sensed something broken, something that hated the very act of wanting. I'll give you until midnight, he said. After that, the deal's gone. He turned, and the heavy door closed behind him. The office fell silent except for the rain against the glass wall. Ursula stared at the contract until the lines blurred. Then she pressed her forehead to the desk and sobbed. What would Dad have done, she thought, but she'd never known him. Her mother's stories had changed every year until she stopped asking. Maybe he was gone, or maybe he just didn't care. By the time the clock struck 11:50, she had made her decision. The door opened again without a knock. Ethan stepped in, coat off, sleeves rolled up, eyes unreadable. Well? She picked up the pen with trembling hands. If I sign, my mother gets the surgery immediately. He nodded once. Already arranged. She looked at him, searching for mercy and finding none. You'll really do it? I don't make empty promises. Her chest tightened. Then this is the last one I'll ever make. The pen touched paper. Her name bled across the dotted line. Ethan's expression didn't change. He reached for the document, folded it neatly, and slipped it into a black folder. Congratulations, Mrs. Blackwood. She flinched at the name. Don't call me that. Habit, he said, turning toward the window where lightning flashed over the city. Pack what you need. A car will pick you up at 8. I don't even have a home anymore, she murmured. Then that saves time. He was gone before she could answer, leaving her with the echo of rain and the realization that her soul now had a price tag. At sunrise, she stood outside the hospital, clutching her mother's frail hand. You'll be okay, Mom. They'll take you in soon. Franca Luthers smiled weakly. You found a way? Yes, Ursula whispered, forcing the lie to sound like hope. A friend helped. Her mother's fingers squeezed hers. You always were my miracle. A nurse entered with papers. She's being prepped now. Ursula kissed her mother's forehead and stepped into the hallway, where a suited man waited. Ethan's driver. The sight of him twisted her stomach. The ride to Blackwood Mansion felt endless. The gates were taller than most buildings in her old neighborhood, the ironwork spelling B. The car rolled through rain-washed cobblestones until the mansion unfolded before her. White pillars, glass walls, a fortress of beauty and ice. Inside, servants moved like shadows. None looked at her. A woman with sleek blonde hair appeared at the top of the stairs, phone in hand, voice dripping honey and poison. "You must be the charity case." Ursula looked up, startled. "I'm Camilla Blackwood," the woman said, descending with a perfect smile. "Ethan's sister. He forgot to tell me he was adopting a stray." Ursula's cheeks burned. "I'm not—" Camilla circled her like a cat. "Of course not. You're his wife, right? Signed, sealed, delivered." She stopped close enough that Ursula could smell her perfume, sharp and expensive. "Here's some free advice, darling. Don't touch anything that isn't yours, and nothing here is." With that, Camilla swept away, laughter echoing through the hall. A servant approached timidly. Mrs. Blackwood, your room is ready." Ursula followed in silence, each step heavier than the last. The room was vast, cold, with silk sheets that felt like someone else's skin. She sat on the edge of the bed, hands shaking. Through the window, the city lights flickered like distant hope. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Surgery successful, patient stable. Her knees gave out as relief crashed over her. She pressed a hand to her mouth, tears falling silently. "She's alive." But the message was followed by another contract activated. "See you at breakfast. E.B." Her heart dropped. She wasn't free. She had only changed cages. Morning came with sunlight slicing through glass walls. Ursula entered the dining room, dressed modestly in borrowed clothes. Ethan sat at the far end of a long marble table, reading a newspaper as if she were invisible. "You didn't eat," he said without looking up. "I'm not hungry." "You'll need strength." He turned the page. "The doctor will start preliminary tests this afternoon." Her brow furrowed. "Tests." He looked up then, eyes cool. "To ensure you can carry my heir." Her fork slipped, clattering against the plate. "Already?" "I don't waste time." She stood, voice trembling. "You said I'd have a choice." Ethan folded the paper slowly. "You made it when you signed." For a heartbeat, neither moved, the silence electric. Then he said softly, "You wanted to save a life. Now, live with the cost." The air between them felt colder than marble, and somewhere deep inside her, the first spark of defiance flickered. She told herself it was only a small flame, enough to stop collapsing under the weight of his stare. Still, when Camilla swept into the drawing room that afternoon with a cluster of guests and the air of someone born into applause, Ursula straightened like a woman who had learned to pretend strength long before she felt it. Camilla's smile was sugar over steel. "Ursula, darling, you look rustic," she said, letting the word hang like a brand. Laughter trailed behind her like perfume. "How are you finding married life with a billionaire?" Ursula's throat tightened. "It's been overwhelming." She kept her voice steady on purpose, letting civility be the shield she didn't have. "Overwhelming? How quaint." Camilla's eyes skimmed Ursula's borrowed dress as if she might critique the fabric. "Do you have hobbies? Philanthropy? A resume? Whatever you do, dear, don't embarrass my brother. He likes things neat." A guest chuckled. Ethan, watching from the far end of the room, didn't move. Watching him was like watching the weather change. No warning, only aftermath. He gave no sign of resentment or softness. Only a cool assessment that made her feel exposed. Later that evening, after the guests left and the house settled into a hush of servants and polishing cloths, a doctor arrived. He was efficient and clinical, like a machine that had learned to care. He spoke softly to Ursula at first, checking notes, listening to blood pressure, taking samples with a hands-off professionalism that only highlighted the strangeness of the request. "This is standard protocol," the doctor murmured, as if reciting reassurance. "We need to confirm physical fitness for pregnancy, rule out contraindications, and determine the IVF process. It won't take long." Ursula forced a small, brittle laugh. "Am I being tested to see if I can have a child for someone else?" The words tasted wrong in her mouth. She swallowed them like a bitter pill. "It's medical necessity," the doctor said. "For any planned pregnancy, especially in situations where urgency matters, we proceed with due diligence." The tests were invasive in the way that no one calls invasive blood draws, questions about family history, a transvaginal ultrasound that left Ursula clutching the bed rail while a machine hummed. Each procedure was wrapped in sterile language, but to her it felt like checkpoints to a life she had not chosen. Ethan stood a foot away from the observation window each time, not entering, not speaking, his hands folded, the carapace of a man who never let himself feel small things. Between tests, Camilla lurked in corners bearing what looked like pity, but felt like warning. "You should smile more," she told Ursula once, plucking at a napkin that had been folded with geometric precision. "People like to see the happy wife. Even if it's an act, at least make it convincing." Ursula understood then how performance replaced intimacy in this house. Even a cough was framed as a potential scandal. She nodded, small, obedient, and inside the flame she'd started to nurture, flickered, not with subservience but with a slow, gathering heat. Ethan's presence was rare and precise. He wasn't cruel for cruelty's sake, which would have been easier to hate. He was methodical. During one late-night consultation with the doctor, Ethan surprised her by leaning against the doorway, his voice quieter than she had ever heard it. "How are you holding up?" he asked, not entirely a question. She flinched, startled into honest words. "I keep thinking about my mom, about how it feels raw to owe something so personal to a man who—" She cut herself off. There were limits to what she could say. Ethan's expression softened for a blink, so fast she almost missed it. "She'll be fine," he said. "I made sure of that." It was the first time he'd said anything beyond the transaction. The admission did not translate into warmth. It was a fact, a line item cleared. But it was an unexpected fracture in his armor, small and tremulous, and Ursula held onto it like a person clutching a life jacket in rough seas, days blurred into regimented hours. The mansion's routines swallowed time, appointments, supervised walks in the conservatory, meals where her hand trembled with utensils she'd never learned to use properly, and late evenings where Ethan's absence felt like a different kind of presence, an omission that reminded her she had given something away. One afternoon, as Ursula rehearsed names of famous law professors under her breath, petty rituals to keep a part of herself alive, she found a note slipped under her door. The handwriting was small, careful. "Meet me in the greenhouse at dusk. A.E." Her pulse stumbled. She knew better than to trust small, secret invitations in a house where cameras watched corners, but the letter felt like a lifeline or a trap. She dressed quietly and moved through a house that felt both gilded and watched. The greenhouse smelled of earth and something sharp and sweet, the scent of survival. Ethan stood beneath a cluster of pale orchids, the last light of day falling on his profile. "You shouldn't wander alone," he said more gently than the public Ethan ever spoke. "You shouldn't have made me sign," she replied without thinking. The words surprised them both by their honesty. He didn't answer immediately. He closed his eyes as if to remember a face from a long time ago. "I didn't expect to care about you," he admitted finally, and the confession landed with the weight of a confession he hadn't meant to give. "I expected indifference. That would have been easier." Her pulse raced. Care from him sounded like a risk rather than a comfort. "Why help, then?" she asked. "Why step in at all?" He looked at her then, and for the first time his eyes looked tired. "Guilt," he said simply. "I have a lot of it, about things I can't change." Guilt. It was a human word dropped in a glass house, and it did something to her. It didn't erase the contract or the price, but it slotted into the narrative, a thread between the two of them that explained why a man of his power would buy a life and name a stranger his wife. In the weeks that followed, small shifts began to rearrange the sharp lines of their life together. Ethan's instructions grew less like edicts and more like guarded suggestions. Once, when she returned late from a library trip where she had frantically tried to prepare for law school entrance exams, he did not scold. Instead, he said, "Study, it will keep your mind sharp," and left before she could reply. Camilla watched these moments with narrowed eyes. Her jealousy was practical, fear dressed as entitlement. She began a campaign of subtle cruelty, canceling appointments without explanation, misplacing Ursula's belongings, and once arranging for a photographer to capture a candid of Ursula looking, by design, out of place. The photo made the rounds within social circles the way a rumor does. It was proof that Ursula didn't belong. Ursula's isolation hardened into resolve. When Camilla mocked her one rainy evening at a family dinner, loudly, cruelly, Ursula stood, voice steady though it trembled. "You can say what you want about me, but my mother is alive because of what I did. I didn't ask for pity." Conversation stilled. Even the clinking of cutlery seemed to fall silent. Camilla's smile thinned like a paper edge. "You accepted a contract," she said. "There are consequences to choices." "Yes," Ursula shot back, surprising herself. "And there are consequences to cruelty." Ethan watched the exchange from the foot of the table. His jaw tensed. For a moment he looked like a man who would step in and erase this argument with a single word. Instead, he did not. Silence, he seemed to decide, carried weight too. He let the moment pass without interference. Yet when later he handed Ursula a small, neatly wrapped book, notes on constitutional law, his fingers brushed hers just long enough for warmth to travel between them. Hope in that mansion never announced itself in grand gestures. It arrived in small, almost accidental kindnesses. A book left on her nightstand, a doctor's appointment rearranged in her favor, a window opened to let in the afternoon air. These were tiny fissures in the ice of Ethan's reserve, and Ursula watched them like someone learning to read a dangerous map. But the house's undercurrent thrummed with potential wreckage. Rumors began to circle, murmurs about Ethan's past, the accident that had scarred him as a boy, whispers that his trust was a currency he spent sparingly. People outside their walls began to stitch narratives out of empty spaces. Inside, tensions tightened. Camilla's barbs grew sharper. Ethan's silences became longer. And as the first trimester approached, the tests became more frequent, more invasive. Each ultrasound felt like a verdict. Each appointment a reminder that she had contracted not only her body, but her emotions into a ledger of obligations. The tiny spark of defiance in Ursula kept growing. But with every passing day, it had to learn how to survive in the dark. The tests kept coming like small, sharp exams, each one a reminder that her body had been catalogued and scheduled as if it belonged to a lab instead of a woman who still hummed the lullabies her mother had taught her. Doctors' voices, clipped and professional, became the soundtrack of her life. Fasting, blood draws, ultrasounds. She learned to answer questions about hormones and viability with the same calm she used when a landlord had thrown her belongings into a hallway. Live, comply, survive. When the nurse smiled and said, "Congratulations," the word fell into her ears like a benediction and a sentence. Ursula clutched the tiny, grainy screen as if it were proof that her sacrifice had substance. A flicker, a pulse, a shadow that could become breath. The relief that had flooded her at the hospital message returned in 1,000 small tides, only this time mixed with terror. She had given Ethan her word, and now the life inside her was tethered to a man who kept his feelings locked in a safe. Ethan's face when she told him at breakfast was unreadable. As always, he set his cup down and said simply, "I knew." The flatness in his voice felt like steel, but for a fraction of a second his fingers lingered on the rim, knuckle white, and she almost believed there was something like warmth beneath the surface. Camilla's reaction was an act, high amusement and a sharpened concern for family reputation. An heir, she purred to the dinner room, making a show for the staff. How convenient. The laughter that followed was a blade wrapped in silk, days folded into one another. Public appearances were scheduled as if she were an accessory. Photo ops at the foundation, where Ethan's name glinted on plaques. Discreet walks through art galleries where critics murmured, Camilla was always present in the margins, raising her eyebrows at any small misstep Ursula made. A misbuttoned sleeve, a blush at a compliment, a slightly clumsy pose. Each slip became fodder for quiet conversations and extrapolated gossip. It was the first time Ursula felt the old pang of schoolyard humiliation, only now the stakes were higher and the punishments colder. She clung to study the way others cling to prayer, reading law lectures on her phone in the quiet hours, whispering case names like incantations. The future she wanted felt both absurd and vital. An image of a woman who had reclaimed herself without owing anyone more than the truth. One evening, as winter light thinned into a chilly dusk, the household's fragile routine splintered. A car appeared at the gate that shouldn't have been, one Ursula recognized by the casual ease of its driver. Jared. Her heart kicked as memories of his face flashed through her, promises that had tasted of sugar and gone stale. He had texted once, asking if they could talk. She had not replied. "Ursula," he called from the doorway of the sitting room, voice that had sounded intimate once, now oddly distant, under the mansion's high ceilings. She felt something cold and raw unclench in her chest. He looked at her with a mix of guilt and opportunism, the same man who had told her he was out of town the night her mother called in crisis. Before she could step forward, Camilla appeared, elegant patience folded into a smile that held steel. "How nice to see you," she said, as if Jared were an expected guest. "Do sit, but know this is a private family home." The warning brittled in the air. Jared's eyes darted to the opulence and then slowly to her face. His voice dipped. "Ursula, I heard about everything. I'm sorry. Can we—" He reached out as if to close a distance that no longer existed. Anger flared, hot and immediate. She wanted to throw accusations, to demand answers for the calls he hadn't returned, for the lies that had cost her a night of consciousness and $1,000. Instead, she swallowed the urge, a small, sharp control that had been drilled into her by survival. "You were with my friend," she said, voice steady. "You left me when I needed you most." Jared's mouth opened, shut. Then he turned away as if the truth put him off. "People make mistakes," he muttered. He didn't finish. The moment collapsed into the mansion's polite hush. Camilla watched the exchange with starving satisfaction. Later, alone, she approached Ursula with a poison-laced pity. "You should have chosen better," she said, stepping close enough for Ursula to feel the perfume in her hair. "Men like that know how to survive. You signed a contract." Her tone implied the contract was a stain, not a protection. That night, Ursula cried in the bathroom until her face felt raw, then sat at the small window and breathed as if the cool air could stitch her lungs back together. The life stirring inside her was a rebuke and a hope, proof that she could make something sacred from bargaining, and desperation Ethan, meanwhile, became a study in complexity. He oscillated between ordered distance and small, bewildering gestures that she could not easily file under transactional. Once he left a note by her bedside. "Don't let them make you small." It read like an instruction and an apology at once. The handwriting was precise, minimal, an olive branch from a man who seemed more comfortable buying loyalty than earning it. But even with these threads of tenderness, other forces conspired to suffocate her. A rumor planted by a rival house spread through social feeds. Blackwood's bride, just a charity case? The story had ugly notes, added by a journalist eager for scandal. Camilla smiled for cameras, like a queen crowning herself, while Ethan's name spun in the center of the storm. Then Taylor returned. Taylor, vivid hair cropped short, a laugh like a ribbon of danger, was a name whispered in corridors of Ethan's past. Rumors had painted her as the one who had once broken him, the girl who had left scars by betrayal. She arrived at a charity luncheon under the guise of supporting a cause, but the way she moved through the room was a provocation. Cameras loved her. People noticed her. Ethan's attention snagged at the edge of her presence like a tether being pulled. Ursula saw them together, far from a stolen embrace, but close enough that the image lodged behind her ribs, Ethan talking quietly, Taylor laughing at something only he heard. She felt the old, familiar twist of jealousy, sharp, humiliating, primal. She had vowed not to let herself feel soft toward him, but each small kindness he offered now landed like a betrayal when measured against Taylor's laughter. One night, returning from a late appointment, Ursula walked through the private library and froze. Light spilled from beneath a slightly ajar door at the end. Voices, soft, intimate, entirely private. Her feet moved of their own accord, curiosity unspooling into dread. She pressed her palm to the door and listened. Ethan's voice, low and clipped. Taylor's, playful and close. She heard a laugh, then a voice that was not a laugh, a sound like surrender. Her heart tripped. She pushed the door open a fraction and saw them. Ethan, leaning toward Taylor with an expression she had never seen on him. Open, unguarded, almost young. Their proximity was ordinary, but the intimacy it suggested was a heat she hadn't been allowed to hold. Taylor turned, startled, and for a flash their faces froze. Then Ethan stepped back, the line of his jaw hardening. He straightened, the practiced coolness sliding back on like armor. In the doorway, Ursula felt the world tilt. Taylor's smile fell away when she saw Ursula. "Oh," she said, surprise too neat to be real. "Mrs. Blackwood, forgive us. We were just—" Her eyes flicked toward Ethan, searching for rescue or an explanation. Ethan's gaze landed on Ursula like an appraisal. No apology, no warmth, only a careful, proprietary command. "Ursula," he said, the name a neutral label then, to Taylor. "This isn't the time." The moment cracked like thin glass. Ursula's legs felt unsteady. She backed away into shadow, the smell of old paper and binding glue clinging to her. The anger that rose in her was cold and precise. She knew what this meant. Proximity, rumor fodder, a new line of knives hidden in smiles. That night, in her small room, the baby's faint movement seemed louder than before. A small, stubborn proof of life that made the betrayals feel twice as sharp. She pressed her hand to her belly and whispered promises she wasn't sure she could keep. "I'll protect you," she said, and meant it with a ferocity that surprised her. She would not let this life be used as a weapon, by Ethan's doubt, by Camilla's cruelty, nor by Taylor's casual intrusion. Outside, the mansion hummed with the soft tick of wealth. Inside, Ursula felt the old stubborn ember in her grow into something that might burn down cages. If you're feeling her pain already, hit that like button. Let's see how many hearts she can reach today. She left the library with her hands on her stomach, breathing shallow and careful, as if each movement might jostle the small life inside her. The house felt suddenly stranger, the corridors longer, the portraits on the walls watching with a polite, indifferent gaze. Taylor's laugh replayed in her head like a cruel echo, and the image of Ethan leaning in had become a new ache, sharp, sudden, and shameful. The stress sat in her chest like a weight that no amount of deep breathing could lift. She told herself it was nothing, just nerves, the sort of reaction any expectant mother might have. But that night the baby moved more insistently than before. A tiny protest against the heavy air, Ursula pressed her palm to her belly and whispered nonsense prayers, old lullabies, promises that felt both brave and absurd. She fell asleep with her face turned toward the window and the mansion's lights like distant stars. At dawn, a tightness woke her. It wasn't like the sudden, crushing pain she'd imagined in dramatized films. It was a steady, insistent pressure that rolled through her in waves. Panic flared. This wasn't part of any schedule she'd been given. She rang for the nurse, voice trembling. The staff moved with the rehearsed urgency, and in minutes she was in the car, racing toward the hospital where her mother had been treated. Ethan met her in the emergency room corridor, eyes closed for a moment as if he'd been waiting for something to snap. The doctor's face was grave. "She's in labor," he said. "We're taking her to delivery now." Ursula's breath hitched. "Please, help me." Her voice was small, raw. He nodded once. "I arranged for the best team." There was no tenderness in it, only efficiency. He took her hand briefly, an almost forgotten human gesture, then let go as the medical team ushered her away. Labor was a blur of lights, machines, and orchestrated commands. She clung to breathing techniques she'd watched on late-night forums, to the muffled voice of a nurse counting her through contractions. Ethan hovered near the doorway. He did not come close except when instructed by the staff. His presence was a careful geometry, near enough to be part of the scene, distant enough to maintain the line between them. And then the first cry resounded, a small, fragile sound that made something in Ursula unclench with relief, so profound it left her shaking. The infant was born, wrapped and handed to her with a soft, businesslike tenderness. For a breathless moment she knew a kind of joy that felt like sunrise. Ethan's face, when he saw their son, shifted into something that nearly broke her, a look of wonder caught in glass. But grief can turn on a dime in rooms like that. The joy faltered. Machines beeped differently. Doctors' faces changed from congratulatory to focused worry. The newborn fought, then stilled. A hush settled like a wet cloth. "No, no, please," Ursula whispered, panic flooding her voice. She reached for the small bundle, only for a nurse to take it from her arms and move away, the staff forming a wall of hushed commands and clinical spacing. Ethan came closer then, voice a taut wire. "What's happening?" he demanded. The head doctor's jaw tightened. "We're doing everything we can. There are complications, internal bleeding. We need to take the baby to neonatal care." Hours or minutes, time slipped, passed in a loop of monitors and antiseptic smells. Ursula felt as if she were underwater, watching herself act, nodding, signing forms she barely understood, answering questions with paper-thin certainty. The doctors pulled her aside once and said words that slammed into her like a closing door. Sudden hemorrhage, unforeseen infection, tragic and rare. She woke hours later in a dim recovery room with a nurse's hand clasping hers. "I'm so sorry," the nurse said, voice low and practiced. "We did everything we could." The announcement landed like a physical blow. Ursula's knees buckled. Somewhere a sound like breaking came from deep in her chest. She felt hollowed out, as if someone had removed the center of her. Ethan's face was a map of something she had never learned to read. Anger, grief, an animal confusion that made him seem suddenly smaller and more dangerous. "What happened?" she asked hoarsely. "You were right there," he said, voice breaking in a way that shocked him more than it did her. "We did what we could." And then the accusations began. Not loud at first, but a whisper threaded into every look and pause, murmurs of malpractice outside the delivery suite, the press already hungry for a story if they could taste scandal. Rumors can be hungry things. They eat facts and pollute them with appetite. When the news filtered through the mansion, it did not stop at sorrow. Camilla's face turned an even colder shade of calculation. She took the news like a strategist absorbs a battlefield shift, looking for advantage in the ruin. "Tragic," she said to Ursula with mock sympathy. "But how unfortunate timing." Days blurred into a raw legal fog. An investigation began, not the kind designed to find solace, but the kind that smells of papers being shuffled and reputations being weighed. The police made questions that cut into Ursula's already fragile sleep. A private security detail, instructed and crisp, shadowed her movements. Ethan's lawyers spoke with the gravity of people who keep houses from crumbling, but the legal net they cast felt more like a trap, tightening Ursula's phone filled with messages she did not open. Faces blurred in the halls. She was exhausted and terrified, and utterly alone in a foreign version of life. The media smelled blood in the water, and within hours clumsy headlines ballooned, each one a late echo of something someone else had decided to be true. A week later, the hospital called her in for what they called a follow-up, to collect samples and make sure there were no lingering medical issues. She went because she had always obeyed the instructions given to her. Obedience had been the currency that kept her mother alive. The testing felt invasive beyond medicine. Each needle prick, each swab, was catalogued for a ledger she did not understand. When the police officer stepped into the sterile examination room, the air seemed to drop. "Ursula Luthers?" he asked, voice professional. She nodded. "Yes." "You're under arrest for suspicion of causing grievous harm to a minor," he said, not raising his voice but phrasing the words with careful, chilling efficiency. "We have reason to believe negligence occurred." The words landed like a slap she could not see coming. "What?" she managed. No, I didn't." Her protests made a small sound like a child's plea. The officer produced a small formality. "You're being detained pending further questioning." He didn't shout. There was no need. Around them, the hospital's hum continued. Indifferent, Ethan arrived at the station later in the day, face a storm of emotions. He did not hold her hand in the interrogation room. He sat across from her, his presence a wall rather than a comfort. "You understand what this means?" he asked. She shook her head. "I didn't do anything. I was in labor." "You were there." His jaw clenched. "The timing is suspicious. There were witnesses stating you were distracted leading up to the delivery. The tests show anomalies. We need answers." The accusation tasted like bile. She wanted to roar that they had taken her child, that she had been used, that she had lost the only thing that had felt purely hers. Instead, she found herself answering questions about times, about medication, about whether she had left the delivery suite. The questions mounted into a tower of doubt and suspicion. They booked her into a holding room for the night. Protocol, they said. Ursula sat on the thin mattress with hands folded in her lap, the bright institutional light making everything raw. She could not sleep. She wrapped a blanket around her shoulders like armor and thought of her mother's hand, of the lullabies she used to hum, of the contract sealed by ink and desperation. Outside, beyond steel and glass, the mansion glowed, its windows like blind eyes. Inside, Ursula felt a new fear take root, not just for herself, but for the little life she had lost, and the life she still carried. The city around them spun on, indifferent and hungry for stories. She had signed away safety for a promise. Now the promise tasted of ash. When the door clunked open and a guard informed her that the bail was set, and that Ethan would be speaking to the prosecutor, She understood the line that divided her world. One side where money bought silence and maneuvering, the other where allegations could swallow a woman whole. She felt caught between two worlds, one that could ruin her for a rumor, and another that could buy back the facts the next morning, as cameras blinked like insects outside and lawyers shifted papers. Ursula sat with her hands in hers and tried to breathe. Each breath felt like a negotiation, with pain, with grief, with a system that had already judged her before she'd spoken. She no longer knew who would believe her. And beyond everything, the ache of loss, immense, private, and unsparing, expanded until it filled her with a cold resolve. If she was to be blamed, she would not vanish like a ghost. She would fight, not with money. She had none, but with an anger that had been forged in years of survival. Ethan posted bail the next day. Cameras flashed as she stepped out of the precinct, pale under the cold morning light. The press shouted questions. Did you harm your baby? Was the marriage a scam? But all she heard was the metallic rattle of chains that no one could see. Ethan's car waited by the curb, tinted windows swallowing the world inside. The air smelled of silence and expensive leather. "Don't speak," he said. "The press will twist anything." Ursula turned to him, voice raw. "You think I killed our child?" He didn't answer immediately. His fingers drummed on the steering wheel, though he wasn't driving. I don't know what to think." She laughed, low and disbelieving. "You don't know? You were there. You saw what happened." His knuckles whitened. "All I saw was a woman who had every reason to hate me and everything that came with me. I saw a woman who was losing control." Her voice broke. "You think grief makes me a murderer?" The car moved through the press crowd like a knife through water. When they reached the mansion, Ursula stepped out before the driver could open her door. Her legs trembled, but she walked tall, past the maids who looked away, and the hallway that smelled of flowers someone had ordered for appearance's sake. Inside, Camilla was waiting. "The police released you quickly," she said, tone light, almost conversational. "Connections help, don't they?" Ursula's eyes burned. "Why are you smiling?" "Because this family is drowning in scandal," Camilla said, voice dropping. "And when Ethan falls, he'll take everyone with him, including you." Ethan entered then, shutting the door hard enough to make the chandelier shiver. "Enough, Camilla." His sister turned, lips twisting. "Oh, brother, don't glare at me. I'm only saying what everyone's thinking. The charity case killed the heir." Ursula flinched. "Stop calling me that." Camilla ignored her. "You built your name on control, Ethan. Now you have none. Look at you, defending her when she destroyed your legacy." "Get out," Ethan said quietly. Camilla's smile faltered. "What?" "Leave." Her voice hardened. "You'll regret choosing her over your own blood." He didn't reply, and the silence between them was answer enough. Camilla turned sharply and strode out, heels clicking like gunshots. When she was gone, Ursula faced him, the air between them heavy with everything unsaid. "You think she's right," she whispered. Ethan's eyes met hers. "I don't know what's right anymore." Her hand trembled on the back of a chair. "Then let me go." He looked away. "It's not that simple." "It is," she said. "You bought my freedom once. Now release it." Something in his face shifted. Pain, maybe, or pride giving way. "If I let you go, the world will destroy you. The press will make you a villain, and you'll have no protection." "I'm already destroyed," she said. He didn't answer. When she turned toward the door, his voice stopped her. "Do you think I don't feel this?" She froze. "I lost a child, too," he said. "Do you think that doesn't matter to me?" She turned back slowly. "Then why blame me?" "Because I need someone to blame," he said simply, "and you're the only one who won't walk away." The honesty of it stunned her. For a heartbeat, neither spoke. The mansion's quiet hum filled the space between them. Then she walked past him, eyes fixed on the staircase, voice low but firm. "You're wrong, Ethan. I'm walking away now." He didn't stop her. That night she packed a single suitcase. The next morning she left before sunrise, slipping out through the servants' gate as the first light touched the marble drive. No one tried to stop her. The city received her with indifferent noise, cars, horns, morning chatter. She booked a room in a cheap hotel under her mother's maiden name. The bed smelled faintly of detergent and rust. For the first time in months, no one told her what to do. Freedom didn't feel like wings. It felt like falling. She spent days moving between grief and numbness. Newspapers carried headlines about the Blackwood scandal. One article speculated that Ethan's company might collapse. Another said he'd fled the country. None of them mentioned her by name, only the wife under suspicion. Then one afternoon she heard a knock. When she opened the door, a man stood there, neatly dressed, familiar in a way that tugged at memory. "Mrs. Luther's?" he asked. "I'm not Mrs. Anything," she said. He smiled faintly. "James Garrett. I used to work with your mother at the clinic. She spoke about you often." The name clicked. One of her mother's old colleagues. "What do you want?" "I wanted to see if you were all right, and to give you this." He held out a small envelope. Inside was a photograph. Her mother smiling, holding Ursula's graduation form on the back. Her mother's handwriting. "Keep fighting no matter what." The words broke something open in her chest. James watched her quietly. "You've been through enough," he said. "If you need work, I can help. My firm's looking for legal assistance." "I'm not qualified," she said automatically. "Maybe not yet," he said, "but you have a way of surviving systems meant to crush you. That's a skill law can use." For the first time in months, hope didn't feel like cruelty. She nodded. "Thank you." James became a quiet presence, a friend who didn't ask questions, who let her rebuild herself in fragments. He never mentioned the scandal, never asked about Ethan. Slowly, she began to study again, spending nights reading law texts until dawn. The mind that had once memorized every clause of a cruel contract began learning how to break others. Months passed. The headlines moved on. She learned to sleep again, to breathe without fear of footsteps in marble corridors. Then, one morning, as she walked past a newsstand, a headline stopped her cold. "Blackwood Empire in turmoil. Ex-mistress reveals scandal below it." A photo of Taylor. Face pale, eyes defiant, lips parted in mid-sentence. The caption read, "I was set up. The child wasn't his." Ursula's breath caught. She bought the paper, hands shaking as she read. The article was chaos. Taylor's confession, her claim that Ethan's sister had manipulated events, her accusation that Camilla had protected the family name at all costs. One line burned into Ursula's mind. Evidence suggests internal interference leading to the death of the Blackwood heir. She sat on a bench, paper trembling in her hands. The world around her blurred, people walking, cars passing, but inside her head, everything went quiet. Camilla. Pieces snapped together in her mind. Camilla's hostility, the way she'd hovered around the nursery plans, her convenient absence the night of the birth. The same day, another headline followed online. "Police reopen investigation after confession." Ursula's phone buzzed, an unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. "Ursula." Ethan's voice was low, hoarse. Her stomach dropped. She hadn't heard his voice in months. "I didn't know," he said, his words rushing, desperate. "I swear I didn't know what she did." She couldn't find her voice. "I thought you—" He stopped himself. "Camilla's being questioned. It's bad." "Good," she said, her voice steady. He breathed in sharply. "You don't understand. She's my sister. She killed our child." Silence, then barely a whisper. Yes. He sounded like a man finally stripped of armor. "Why are you calling me, Ethan?" she asked. "Because," he said, voice cracking, "I don't know how to live with what I let happen." The line went quiet, except for the static of breath between them. Ursula closed her eyes. "Then start by telling the truth." "I will," he said. "And when this is over, I'll accept whatever punishment comes." She almost didn't believe him, but something in his tone, tired, broken, made her pause. "Then do it," she said. "Not for me, for him." When she hung up, she realized her hands had stopped shaking. For the first time since that night, her grief didn't feel like drowning. It felt like purpose. By evening, her phone lit again with another headline. "Camilla Blackwood arrested for infanticide and fraud." And for the first time in a long time, Ursula smiled. A small, sad smile, but real nonetheless. Months passed before the city stopped whispering the name Blackwood, like a scandal. When the news broke that Ethan himself had turned in the last pieces of evidence, the documents Camilla had hidden, the phone calls she'd made to Taylor, the falsified hospital orders, the story shifted from rumor to tragedy. He was charged not as a conspirator, but as a man who had failed to report a crime he should have seen. It was leniency, but still a sentence. The last time Ursula saw him before court, he was thinner, dressed simply, hands clasped like someone who had finally understood the shape of remorse. They met in a police corridor where lawyers passed with files and tired eyes. "I came to say thank you," she said quietly. "You could have buried the truth." He looked up, eyes blue and stripped of their usual calm. "I already tried burying too much." For a long second, they just looked at each other. No fury now, no accusations, just exhaustion and the strange stillness that follows confession. When the trial ended, Ethan received a light sentence, 10 years reduced for cooperation and time served under house restriction. Camilla's crimes were worse. The judge's voice trembled as he read the charges. Camilla's final act had been an attempted escape. The report said she had been caught in a chase that ended with gunfire. Ethan listened to the verdict with his eyes closed, hands still. Ursula watched from the back of the courtroom. She didn't cheer, didn't cry. Justice, when it arrived, didn't feel like triumph. It felt like breath. Afterward, she moved quietly through her new life. James helped her find work in a legal aid center. She spent nights studying and days interviewing clients who reminded her of her younger self. People trying to survive contracts written in fine print, debts that looked like cages. She passed her entrance exams on the third try. By the time her belly began to swell again, she had learned to smile without apology. The pregnancy felt like a gift she could protect, one she hadn't bargained away. She didn't tell anyone except James, who respected her silence. When the child was born, a girl with storm-gray eyes, Ursula named her Mila, a name that meant grace and strength in one word. The years that followed were full and unremarkable in the best way. She built her degree, case by case, argument by argument, becoming the kind of lawyer she had once dreamed of, one who fought for women no one else believed. People began to call her the advocate who doesn't flinch. 5 years later, Ethan was released early for good behavior. The papers printed a single subdued headline: "Billionaire leaves prison, declines interviews." He disappeared from public life. She assumed that was the end of it. Then one afternoon, as she walked Mila home from kindergarten, a car slowed beside them at the crosswalk, a window lowered. The man who stepped out was older, quieter, but his eyes, those impossible blue eyes, were the same. Mila tugged at her sleeve. "Mommy, who's that?" Ursula's throat tightened. "An old friend." Ethan stopped a few feet away. He looked at Mila, then at Ursula, and something in his face softened completely. "She looks like you," he said. "She looks like herself," Ursula replied gently. He nodded. "May I?" Ursula hesitated, then gave the smallest nod. Ethan crouched, careful, as if the ground beneath him were sacred. "Hello, Mila," he said softly. "Do you like stories?" Mila smiled shyly. "I love stories." "Good," he said, voice trembling just enough to betray everything he felt. "I used to tell your mother stories about building things that last." She giggled. "Will you tell me one?" He looked up at Ursula, waiting for permission. She sighed, then nodded. He began, voice low. "A simple tale about a broken house that learned to stand again because someone cared enough to rebuild it." Piece by piece, Mila listened, eyes wide, clutching his hand halfway through without realizing. When the story ended, Ethan straightened, smiling at the little girl's applause. "I'll let you both get home," he said. "I only wanted to see that you were okay." "We are," Ursula said. It was the truth. He nodded once more. "If you ever need anything, Mila should have everything that's hers. I left papers with my lawyer. No conditions." She studied him, the man who had once owned every inch of her freedom, now standing like someone asking to borrow forgiveness instead of demanding it. "I don't want your money," she said quietly. "I know," he replied, "but it's hers anyway." He turned as if to go, but Mila's small voice stopped him. "Will you come again and tell another story?" Ethan's breath hitched. He looked to Ursula, uncertain. She hesitated only a moment before answering for both of them. "Maybe." He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that carries both grief and peace. "Then I'll wait for maybe." As he walked away, Ursula felt something lift. Years of blame, fear, shame. The air around her seemed lighter. Mila slipped her hand into hers. "He's nice," the little girl said. Ursula squeezed her fingers. "He's learning to be." That night, after Mila slept, she sat at her desk beneath the dim light, flipping through old notes and case files. On the corner of her desk was the only relic she'd kept from the Blackwood years. The contract, edges yellowed, ink faded. She read the first line aloud, then tore it cleanly in half. The sound was soft, final. Outside, the city pulsed with distant life. She closed her eyes and thought of her mother's voice, of the tiny heartbeats she had carried, of all the losses that had become lessons. Some stories ended with revenge. Hers, she decided, would end with release. The next morning, she walked Mila to school. At the gate, Ethan was waiting, a quiet figure among other parents, holding a children's book. Mila squealed and ran to him. Ursula watched for a moment, the sun warm on her face, then crossed the street to join them. She didn't know what came next, only that the past no longer owned her. The mansion, the contract, the headlines, all of it had faded into something distant, a story told to teach a lesson. Ethan turned as she approached. "Coffee?" he asked carefully. She smiled, not out of romance, but of calm. "Maybe," she said again, and for once maybe felt like freedom. Like, subscribe and comment where you're watching from if you believe that every story deserves a second chance.